Hi, my name is Laura Dawson, and I'm a Principal Program Manager at the AWS Institute at Amazon Web Services. My colleagues on the AWS Government Transformation team have put together a great online repository of open source resources called AWS Open Government Solutions. These resources were created by governments and public sector organizations around the world, and they are free to use by any government anywhere. But before we talk about AWS Open Government Solutions, let's start with the basics. First, what is open source? Open source is a decentralized software development process in which a loosely coordinated community of contributors work together to create or improve a product or service. Now, technically, open source refers to assets that have an open source license. But for practical purposes, it can include a range of tools such as design patterns, or even advice about how to design content for emergency response, or how to make content more accessible for people with disabilities. To explain more, here's Peter Eulander, Director of Open Source at AWS Marketing.
In the most simplest of terms, open source software, open source technologies is a product where you actually get to see how it was made, what was the source, what are the bits and pieces that the creator put in to make it work. But what extends it to make it really cool is that you get the four freedoms of open source, which is you have the right to use it, modify it, or distribute it without any cost, right? And I think the reason why this has really taken off over the past couple of decades, both in consumer spaces and business spaces and in government spaces, is the fact that it embodies a certain spirit in how products are created, right? It's an open exchange of ideas. It's collaborative participation, regardless of who you work for or what country you might be part of. Because of that, you get rapid ideation. All politics are pushed aside and people are focused on solving a problem. And that community-oriented development really kind of creates opportunity for everybody who participates in it. So I think it's a neat movement that drives fast ideas that anyone can participate in. And that's why it's grown so fast in its adoption from a global perspective. And I think the neat thing, especially if you're not a technologist, the things that people probably don't realize is open source is in your cars, it's in your TV, it's on your phone, it's in the planes that you're part of, right? Open source has become just a foundational platform for how we build product or consume technology. It generally, it exists everywhere.
To understand better how open source code and resources travel the world to make it easier for governments to develop new services swiftly and at scale, let's look at the example of a government notification service called Notify. Notify is a text messaging and email notification service that can be used to send messages to citizens on anything from student loan processing to disaster response information. The code for Notify was developed initially by the Government Digital Service in the United Kingdom. Right now, Notify is being used by more than 1,500 agencies in the UK. It is really delivered when citizens need it at most, including critical notifications related to COVID-19. Once the UK developers completed their work on Notify, they made it available to everyone on the GitHub repository. GitHub is a cloud-based repository that hosts open source code and helps to manage version control and collaboration. Soon after, the Government of Australia downloaded the Notify code and set about adapting it to their own needs, including modifications for local currency and phone number formats. Notify also caught the attention of the Government of Canada, and they took advantage of the combined efforts of the UK and Australian governments to develop their own Notify app. Canada also customized the program by adding French language capabilities. Then they returned the modified version to the GitHub repository to join the UK and Australian versions. While open source is not free, in the sense that governments have to contribute time and effort to modify and test the programs, open source is a lot more economical than buying commercial software or developing your own programs from scratch. In the case of Notify, the Australian government estimates that it took about 8 weeks and cost just over $70,000 to launch their customized version of the program. Notify is now being used by over 100 departments at all levels of the Australian government. Notifications that used to take days can now be completed in about an hour. Governments that use open source do better in terms of speed, scale, cost, and reliability. We spoke to some experts to find out why this is so.
Open source tools are remarkable in that they allow governments to gain access to the best thinking and the best tools that are available, and then quickly customize those tools to meet the needs of citizens within their communities. It's a way of responding far more quickly and far more efficiently to the very demanding challenges that public servants are facing as they try to operate in an increasingly dynamic environment.
Open source lets you collaborate with other like-minded creators and also like-minded problem solvers. Definitely innovation. So you're getting access to people's innovative ideas, and then of course cost savings, because these creative ideas are being built, maybe once, and then they're being iterated on.
Anteriormente, yo creo que uno de los principales beneficios de usar código abierto para los gobiernos es que pueden implementar muy buenas iniciativas con un costo y un esfuerzo razonable. Sobre todo, en países como los nuestros, donde necesitamos realmente generar conciencia del gasto y poder ahorrar, la reutilización del código nos permite poder ser más eficientes en el uso de los costos. Además, ofrecer servicios públicos a los ciudadanos de manera efectiva, eficiente y cuidando los recursos es particularmente importante para el caso de la gestión pública. Podemos decir que esta quizás sea una diferencia en lo que es la reutilización de código abierto en el sector comercial. Creo que eso es lo que lo diferencia respecto al sector público. Bueno, claro que sí. Nosotros desde la ciudad, además de crear plataformas como las que ya nombré, el BA Data, que es el portal de datos, el BA Obras, que es el portal de obras abiertas, nosotros vamos a estar lanzando ahora, en el próximo mes, la plataforma de BA Cambio Climático, que también va a estar desarrollada en código abierto. Básicamente lo que busca esta plataforma es ser el ancla comunicacional de toda la estrategia de cambio climático del gobierno de la ciudad, y algo que quiero destacar es que es un sitio que ha sido co-creado con expertos, con sociedad civil y con ciudadano a pie. Es la primera experiencia que tenemos desde el gobierno de la ciudad de un sitio co-creado que tenga en cuenta todas las miradas y distintas visiones para poder agregar valor.
So one government in Mauritius, the country there focused on tapping into an existing open source solution to build the back end to their laboratory system to kind of track and manage COVID-19 tests. The benefits of this were they were able to much more quickly go to scale and implement a solution tapping into an existing open source product than going out to the commercial market. This also ended up saving a significant amount of money, which they could then use to tackle other public health priorities and also scale up the solution as well. So we saw it having particular benefits on the ground in Mauritius.
And there is a great example that comes out of Oklahoma. Oklahoma is actually one of the few states where statewide evictions data is aggregated, and they make it publicly available. When COVID hit, there were a couple of philanthropists in the community that wanted to buy down the cost of rent and fees owed by people who were about to be evicted. And they were able to use this database that was built using open source in order to glean from the data, all of the fees that were back owed, all of the rent that was back owed. And then they're able to use that information to go negotiate with landlords about, can we have this eviction withdrawn because the philanthropist is willing to pay this fee.
We recently did a project with New York City to develop a data system that would help to validate the eligibility of individuals within New York City for different government benefits. And what we found as we built out that solution is that the city of Baltimore had a very similar challenge, and the solution that we were working on was actually a really good fit for the need that they were trying to fill as well. And so that solution is now being adapted and adopted by both New York City and Baltimore, with other communities waiting in the wing. And both of them are going to get access to a really powerful tool that they'll be able to utilize in different contexts, but to solve similar problems at very, very little cost. So it's a fantastic way of using the power of civic innovation to meet the needs of citizens in different settings.
por eso menos importante, dado el contexto actual en donde la ciudadanía tiene un desarrollo en el plano digital casi tanto como en el físico, es fundamental que los servicios públicos digitales, así como los servicios públicos físicos, cumplan con estándares de transparencia y nuevas funcionalidades que queden a disposición del ciudadano. En este caso tenemos el ejemplo de la reutilización del código debido a su lógica de open source.
Leveraging open source solutions actually improves trust. And so sharing that information out into the open source community demonstrates transparency. So you're not keeping your code secret, you're actually putting it out in the space for others to see, to question, and to innovate on top of.
The United Nations estimates that $2.6 trillion a year is lost to corruption. A further $3.2 trillion a year is lost worldwide to tax evasion. That money on its own would, in principle, be enough to fund the entirety of the UN Sustainable Development Goals, the agenda, the development agenda for the entire planet, if we could harness it effectively. We know and we have seen that open source tools are proving to be incredibly powerful in the fight against corruption. In Ukraine and Moldova, open source technology platforms have dramatically reduced corruption. In Ukraine, where we have very good numbers, corruption has fallen by more than half in public procurement following the adoption of an open source platform there.
More often, we're hearing about the efficiency of working with reusable solutions. Sometimes off-the-shelf applications don't deliver the functionality that governments need. By building their own solutions with reusable components, they can develop more customized solutions at a faster rate. But what I didn't realize at first are the benefits of having many people working on the same product at the same time. So, for example, when a government makes its code available to other governments, digital teams in those other governments are likely to make improvements that the first government can then use in the future. That's what we mean when we say building for reuse. And these reusable assets are improving the lives of citizens and communities around the world.
So I think what COVID has highlighted is that the challenges faced by many governments around the world are often very similar. They may happen in different ways, they may happen at different times, but the fundamentals behind them are quite shared. So that really kind of reaffirms the importance of actually building on what works, building on best practice, and learning from each other as well. This is where we see open source as having particular relevance because many of these solutions have been proven in other settings. So for example, in the context of COVID, many communicable disease open source solutions were proven in the Ebola outbreak across the African continent several years ago and to today as well, or in other settings as well. When we talk about things like chatbot development or data collection, many of these solutions in the open source community have also been proven for many years too. So for governments, there is an existing pool of expertise and solutions to tap into. And also many of these have been applied at significant scale by other governments before. So they're able to then learn from how other governments have engaged with this community, engage with these solutions, and start implementing them locally as well.
In too many places, we have governments relying on institutional architecture that was developed in the 18th and 19th century and technology from the 20th century to try and solve the problems of today. We work with partners in the public sector to design best-in-class solutions that can meet the needs of their citizens and then help scale those solutions across multiple jurisdictions all over the planet. We're also working to help build the field of digital public goods and help different stakeholders come together, organizations that have previously been working on discrete challenges like digital identity or taxation or public finance or civic participation and voting, to start recognizing the commonalities and the benefits that could arise if they pool their efforts and rather than seeing their tasks as being isolated sector by sector, work together to build out a set of tools that can be used across different communities and across the public sector to solve big challenges.
So by sharing your ideas, you're going to tap into the creative energy of other developers that are facing similar challenges.
Once you have created an open source solution for reuse, and other communities start to harness that tool in the context of their communities, they're oftentimes going to be able to make it better, and they're going to be able to make it better very quickly and at no cost to you. And you then are able to harness the innovations that they will build into those systems and use them to serve your citizens. So rather than just having a one and done tool that ends up collecting dust, your tool will get better and better with the passage of time, and you're going to be able to incorporate the solutions and the additions that other communities are going to add to it into the work that you're doing.
So we tend to offer two main points in our kind of first interactions with government. The first is to really focus on problem definition. So working with your policymakers, your citizens and others to actually understand what the problem is, where the pain points are as well. The second is to recognize that neither open source nor closed source is a panacea. Both are tools in your kind of toolkit, and it's about understanding how to best apply them and where they can add the most value. So being brave with the problem definition piece, and also being brave and open to looking at alternative solutions, or being thoughtful with how you engage with the solutions that are available from the private sector or the open source community is very, very important.
AWS has cloud innovation centers around the world that partner with educational institutions and nonprofits to tackle complex problems, and they're producing open source solutions as a result. Sometimes these solutions are actually not that complex. For example, when people are applying for utility and rental assistance, they're having to, enter information about themselves, their address, their situation. They're having to upload documents, and that process can sometimes have errors that end up impacting their ability to access resources. So the ASU Cloud Innovation Center in Phoenix, Arizona, built an optical character recognition capability, OCR, that helps automatically transform information from that uploaded document into text, so that you don't actually have to type in a lot of the information if it's already represented in the documents you're uploading as proof.
Many philanthropic donors and actors within the foundation sector are eager to support the development of public sector tools that can solve problems for many different communities at a time. So one of the things we do at New America is collaborate with partners in state, city, and national government who want to develop best-in-class solutions but may not have enough resources available to do that on their own. And we leverage philanthropic capital to ensure that they can build a really world-class open source solution with the expectation that that tool is going to be utilized by other communities around the world.
The Open Government Solutions Catalog is a curated collection of open source digital services, as well as standards and practices used by governments around the world. So what will you see when you visit the OGS website? First of all, AWS didn't create the content on the site, but what we've done is organize the content so that it's easier to use, especially if you're someone who is new to open source and want to understand how other governments are using it. The first thing you'll see on the site is that all of the resources are organized by category. If you navigate through the links, you'll see that we've taken a broad approach to reusable assets. Open source doesn't just mean code. The site has all sorts of useful resources for governments. For example, here is a crisis communications checklist. It's from Canada, but the lessons could be applied anywhere. And here is a playbook from the US Digital Service on how to make online government services more effective and easy to use. The OGS repository includes examples from large governments and from small ones. The Open Government Solutions Catalog is proving to be a great resource for our customers. Visit us at the link shown on your screen to find out for yourself. Also, look at the description box below to find links to all of the sites we mentioned here today.